An international team of forensic experts is flying in to the scene of a 90-year-old crime in a far-flung Siberian forest, including a leading forensic anthropologist and veteran of the 9/11 investigation, Anthony Falsetti.
It's really vast out here, so desolate, so far away from civilization, but that's where two bodies are supposed to be.
It's another case of huge significance, especially for Russia. The remains of long-lost members of its royal family may have been found at last, but nobody knows for sure. The truth of what happened to the Romanovs has long been blurred by myth and legend. Did the royal line of Russia end in a violent murder, or did an heir to the throne escape and survive? The investigation team also includes Dr. Michael Coble, a leading forensic DNA expert who works for the Pentagon, identifying the remains of American soldiers. With the American military's laboratories at his full disposal, he'll attempt to put names to these mystery bones. The team is headed into a remote forest, 20 kilometers outside the Siberian city of Yekaterinburg. This far-flung industrial outpost is where the fate of Russia's royal family was written. Five children, born into royalty. The Grand Duchesses Olga and Tatiana, the flower of young womanhood. Maria and Anastasia are beguiling teenagers. 13-year-old Crown Prince Alexei is the boy born to be king. Millions of loyal Russians revere them, even worship them. A divine family set on earth to rule the nation. But the Romanov line would end with them. 1917, the Russian Revolution. In its wake, a civil war raged, the Bolsheviks against the Tsarist loyalists. The royal family was imprisoned, exiled to Siberia, under house arrest in Yekaterinburg. But their popularity among the masses presented a problem for the fledgling Soviet administration. The Bolshevik leadership planned a show trial and execution for the Tsar. Perhaps wary of a populist backlash, some accounts say Lenin wanted the rest of the family kept alive as political pawns. From here, forensic anthropologist Dr. Anthony Falsetti and the investigative team have to complete their journey on foot to meet the men who may have made a stunning historical find.
So, what did you find?
Что вы нашли?
Where did you find it?
Останки двух православных святых примерно вот в этом месте.
How deep was the burial?
The remains have been moved to a morgue for safekeeping.
What else did you find with it? Any artifacts?
Вы нашли кости или что-то другое?
What I'm hearing from these archaeologists is they have bones, maybe some projectiles. What we don't have is any evidence of a really controlled excavation, and it's quite frankly making me nervous.
So far, there's not much to go on. There's no evidence at the crime scene and scant documentation to support the find. The Romanov case has been plagued by hoaxes and cover-ups over the years, and this latest find may be no different. In the days after the murders, newspapers reported only that the Tsar had been killed. For 8 years, the Soviet state maintained that the rest of the royal family was alive and well. But the cover-up failed, forcing the Russian government to change its story and make a shocking admission. All 11 members of the royal household had been executed. Then came reported sightings of Prince Alexei and Princess Anastasia. Were the children dead or alive? Sensational rumors kept emerging. In Moscow, there was unease about the exact fate of the Romanovs. An imposter claiming to be Alexei was officially investigated. Years pass. Under Stalin's iron rule, it was forbidden to even mention the royal family. In the 1950s, a member of the original firing squad surfaced in the United States. Austrian Rudolf Lacher claimed he had been left to guard a truck carrying the royal bodies. When it got stuck in the mud in the middle of a forest, he said he helped a wounded Anastasia escape. The Romanov legend and rumors of a surviving heir were revived. After the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, local academics armed with shovels and vital information ventured into the Koptyaki forest to dig. Although the Romanovs' executioners were long dead, papers handed down by their commander, Yakov Yurovsky, held clues as to where the bodies of the royal household might lie. The dig revealed a shallow grave. Skulls, bones, full skeletons. But something was missing.
In 1991, 9 sets of remains were found. There were 11 people that were killed in Ekaterinburg that night. 2 sets of remains were still missing.
The Tsar and Tsarina, 3 of their daughters, and 4 attendants are identified. But 2 of the youngest royal children aren't among the dead. Now, little more than 60 meters from the first grave, a second find is being investigated by leading American forensic experts. Locked away in the Yekaterinburg city morgue, the newly uncovered bones will be subject to the most intensive 21st century forensic analysis. Did all of the Russian royals come to a violent end at the hands of Bolshevik executioners? Or could the legends be true? Did 2 of Tsar Nicholas's children survive? Forensic anthropologist Anthony Falsetti and DNA expert Michael Coble are about to get their first look at the bones that may answer these intriguing questions once and for all. Under lock and key in the Yekaterinburg morgue, access to these potentially royal remains is tightly controlled. In the year 2000, the Romanovs were canonized as martyrs by the Russian Orthodox Church. If authenticated, these bones could become holy relics. Anthony Falsetti is no stranger to these halls. He was part of the original team assembled in the 1990s to investigate the first set of Romanov bones. The investigation and its findings proved highly controversial, sparking a very public row. Russian scientists used facial reconstruction techniques to claim that one of the bodies was that of Anastasia, but others were unconvinced. Still more troubling was the body count discrepancy.
2 bodies are still missing, and it is a mystery.
If 2 bodies were missing, was the entire grave unrelated to the Romanovs? There were accusations of political interference and rushed, rash conclusions. In the end, the Russian Orthodox Church rejected the DNA evidence as tainted and refused to acknowledge that the remains were in fact the Romanovs. But now this new find could change all that. And this time the team wants to avoid the storm of publicity that engulfed investigations in 1991. But the Romanov mystery is an enduring fascination.
We arrive into the lab and there's a massive number of cameras and people doing interviews while we're trying to look at the remains.
The start of the latest investigation makes the evening news. But once the cameras have gone, a critical story emerges.
Once the cameras are gone, we get down to work. And what I discover is that these 44 fragments Many we're not going to be able to identify as being human. Perhaps they're not. There's just not enough material here.
These shattered remains look nothing like the nearly complete skeletons found in 1991. Broken, almost unrecognizable. But careful inspection by expert eyes reveals the fragmentary remains are human. But exactly who are they the remains of? Could these be the bones of Alexei, Maria, or Anastasia? Or do they belong to someone else entirely?
The mystery within the mystery is what happened to Anastasia. Did she escape? Or is she here? Right now, I can't tell whether I have two females, or a male and a female, or whether these fragments are part of the other bones that were already recovered.
Handling and photographing what may be the bones of saints is a delicate matter. Each fragment must be handled with the greatest respect and sensitivity. Then, after intricate examination, a breakthrough.
It doesn't look like much. It is a portion of the pelvis. It is our os cox. And as it turns out, it is from a female. We can deduce that by the sciatic notch. In males, it would be more narrow. In females, it is quite wide. That is critical. We know we have two people. Now we know that one of them is female.
A male and a female. Body parts from two individuals. But are they the missing Romanov children? Anthony Falsetti and the forensic anthropologists will have to dig deeper. For Mike Coble and the DNA team, there's another problem. These bones show evidence of burning.
Looking at the remains, I'm beginning to think this is going to be a very difficult case. When the bone is burned, there's a lot of heat generated, which is not very good for DNA.
Take our sample from down here, 2.5, 3 centimeter cut.
Michael Coble selects fragments most likely to yield readable DNA. Minute pieces will be cut off and sent to his lab in America and to other researchers around the world for independent analysis.
These are the fragments that we think.
But teasing out the 90-year-old genes that may lie dormant in the fragments will take weeks, and the chances that the DNA has survived intact are slim. For the forensic team, a few pieces of badly damaged bone isn't much to go on. But in the town where the Romanov family met their end, there are more leads to pursue. Local archaeologist Sergei Pogolyov was one of the excavators who found the second lot of bones in 2007. He has kept and carefully stored evidence taken from the grave in the forest. Among the artifacts he's preserved are fragments of a wooden crate, quantities of ash, and some pieces of pottery. Each is a clue to what might have happened when the remains were buried. The ash corroborates with burn marks found on the bones. A grim picture is beginning to materialize.
What kind of container do you think?
The pottery shards are perhaps the most compelling evidence. They match similar fragments found in the nearby grave uncovered in 1991.
So these are the ones from 1991?
Да, это 91-го года.
Other pieces of the puzzle will have to be found and put together correctly before a true picture can emerge of exactly what happened in the forest outside Yekaterinburg more than 90 years ago. The most important pieces to that puzzle. 3 bullets. Exhumed from the grave, these projectiles may be the very bullets that killed the heir to the Romanov throne. If they match the bullets found in the nearby grave in 1991, a conclusive forensic connection could be made between the two graves. The bullets are taken for expert analysis. When fired from a gun, a bullet is scored with distinctive scratches as it travels through the barrel. These so-called bore markings are like fingerprints. The first of the 3 bullets found in the 2007 grave excavation is too damaged for analysis. But the other 2 have survived intact. Initial tests show the other 2 bullets have nearly identical bore marks, implying that the same kind of gun was used.
We can determine that the bullets were shot from the same weapon, a Browning pistol.
The type of weapon may have been identified, but the results have exposed yet another twist in the tale.
These bullets are different in caliber than the ones found in 1991.
The bullets don't match those found in the earlier grave, meaning a different gun had to have been used to kill those buried in the other grave nearby.
We know that this gun is from the same time period, but we don't have a direct tie to the 91 finds.
No link. A new and previously unknown weapon. If there's no hard evidence linking the graves to the same crime, then perhaps the remains in the latest grave belong to nameless victims and have nothing to do with the slaughter of the Romanov family. So far, forensic investigations haven't been able to link the graves or the remains found inside them. In Russia, the forensic investigator Anthony Falsetti's trail is running cold. But the answer to the lost bones' identity and to what really happened to Anastasia and the rest of the Romanov children may be inside this box. These are the samples DNA expert Michael Koebel selected back at the Yekaterinburg morgue. They've made the journey halfway around the world to the United States, sealed in contamination-proof containers. Other samples are on their way to Austria and other labs around the world. The package is brought into a sterile room. At each stage, proper procedures are followed to make sure that the samples aren't damaged or contaminated. The tiny samples inside weigh just a few grams each. Are these the remains of Alexei, Maria, or Anastasia Romanov? To find out, viable DNA will have to be extracted, then traced back through the generations to genetic markers shared by a select group of people, the intermarried households of European royalty. The Romanov children, like the British royal family, were descended from Queen Victoria. The DNA in this royal bloodline bears unique identifying genetic characteristics. Michael Koebel and his team are more used to dealing with modern remains. These bone fragments are nearly a century old, and teasing viable DNA out of them won't be easy. DNA is fragile and easily damaged by the ravages of time. They've endured almost a century below ground in a climate of extremes, well below freezing in winter and swelteringly hot in summer. To extract and test the DNA, most of the powdered sample will be used up. If this first attempt fails, there might not be enough material left over for a second definitive DNA analysis. And the mystery of Russia's royal grave may never be solved. An international effort is underway to solve the 90-year-old murder mystery of the Russian royal family. American forensic anthropologist Anthony Falsetti has a lead that may help him piece together separate shreds of evidence recovered from the crime scene. It's a testimony from a long-dead witness. Years ago, it would have been unthinkable. But now an American investigator has high-level access to Moscow's state archive.
Here I am, an American scientist, 2 floors below ground, 100 years worth of communist secrets.
The keeper of those secrets is Dr. Ludmila Likova. Giant blast doors, designed to protect the Kremlin's most precious records from nuclear attack, swing open.
We're down here, it's 30 feet, walls are 2 feet thick, and this is Lenin's archive.
If Soviet archives hold the missing pieces to the Romanov puzzle, this is where they'll be.
So these are Lenin's documents, his originals?
Телеграмма из Копенгагена Ленину.
This one's from Copenhagen, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Rumor here going that the Tsar has been murdered. Kindly wire facts. What's this?
This inquiry was one of many sent to Lenin in the weeks and days before the killing. This was his reply.
Rumor not true. Tsar safe. All rumors are only lie of capitalist press. And it's signed Lenin.
When Lenin wrote this reply, the royal family was alive, asleep. But they had only hours left to live. By daybreak on the 17th of July, the deed had been done. But exactly what happened in the cellar is still open to question. Only the executioners knew, and their statements are on file in another basement. The report filed by the head executioner, Commander Yakov Yurovsky, is regarded as the most accurate account and makes chilling reading.
Yurovsky said this about the execution of the emperor's family. They stood along the wall, and here he said the following words to them. The reign of the Romanovs has reached its end. Despite the fact that relatives both outside and inside the country are trying to liberate them, the Ural Soviet of the Workers' Deputies has decreed they must be shot.
When the executioners opened fire, there were a number of problems. Amongst them, they were in a basement room with stone walls, which sent the bullets sort of ricocheting around the room.
The firing, Yurovsky says, becomes ever so confused. And when this confused fire ended, the shooters saw the daughters were still alive. They shot the girls, but nothing happened. They weren't able to kill them.
Incredibly, eyewitness accounts agree that the duchesses seemed to be protected by jewel-filled corsets that acted like bulletproof vests. Statements by surviving firing squad members recorded in the 1960s confirm this.
It appeared they'd sewn diamonds into their bras, a variety of necklaces, pearls, etc., etc. Bullets were bouncing off. There was somebody, well, so to say, as if they had not finally killed. This woman, Anastasia.
A botched execution. Anastasia may have survived the initial gunfire. Could she really have cheated death with a gem-laden corset? And if that was true, then what else might be possible?
All the accounts go on to say that everyone was finally killed with a gunshot wound to the head. But what if that's a lie? What if there were co-conspirators?
Co-conspirators that could have helped her escape. It's another unsubstantiated story. The forensic investigator decides to stage an experiment to put the first part of the story to the test.
Could jewels stop a bullet?
Diamonds are the hardest naturally occurring substance known to man, but aren't practical, or within the budget of this experiment. Scoring a respectable 8 out of 10 on the gem hardness scale, zirconias are a more realistic alternative. The replica corset is finished with rose quartz and carnelian. Bullets will smash into it at 1,000 feet per second. Will they be deflected? Interior Ministry Colonel Vladimir Soloviev is the leader of the Romanov investigation. He's got special permission to handle the actual guns fired by Yurovsky and his execution squad.
Tsar Nicholas II was killed with this pistol. This second pistol was also in the basement of the Impatiev house, and it may have been used to kill other members of the Tsar's family. This pistol was also used in all the events in the Impatiev house.
It's a grotesque feeling to be in the presence, to hold the weapons that killed this family.
The original guns can't be used in the experiment, but the investigation has provided duplicates, guns from the same era, but with less iconic value. The reconstructed jewel corsets are placed on a mannequin. For safety, only the shooter is allowed in the room. Could a diamond corset have shielded Anastasia from a hail of bullets?
We had different powered weapons. They were fired sequentially, and what we have on the first two is clearly some fragmentation. These projectiles did not pass through on these first two. There's an impact site here from the second, but none of these were what we would consider penetrating gunshot wounds. This acts like a bulletproof vest. Maybe the legend is true.
Perhaps the bones found in the forest aren't from people killed in the basement that night after all. A gunshot aimed at the heart, deflected by jewels sewn beneath the clothes. The accounts that bullets ricocheted, that Maria or Anastasia and Alexei perhaps survived the initial gunfire, are becoming plausible. For almost a century, these accounts have been the basis for many spurious claims to the Russian throne. Anna Anderson's claim was the most famous. She went to her grave claiming to be the last Grand Duchess Anastasia. She convinced many people, including the family of Peter Sarandanaki, whose ancestors were part of the Tsar's inner circle.
My mother-in-law, to her dying days, to her last day, believed that Anna Anderson was Anastasia. For instance, she had a triangular injury on her foot, which was probably a bayonet stab. She also had the same stub toe problem as Anastasia. She had the same ear as Anastasia. There were a lot of similarities between the two.
Despite her persuasive story, DNA testing after her death revealed her true identity. She was not a royal, but a former factory worker from Poland. But determining whether the latest remains are those of the Romanov family or simply another case of mistaken identity will take time. The DNA is so degraded that it must be copied or amplified to recover and identify any surviving fragments of genetic information that remain. At his lab outside Washington, D.C., DNA expert Michael Coble and his team are using a process called PCR, or polymerase chain reaction. By exposing the faint traces of DNA that remain to a bacterial enzyme, a single piece of DNA can be multiplied, generating millions of copies. But even after amplification, there are no guarantees that any readable DNA will emerge to make identification possible. For now, the identity of the two individuals in the grave remains a mystery. While the search for viable DNA continues in America, in Russia, the search for clues has come to an end. Forensic expert Anthony Falsetti is going back with more questions than answers about the most recent grave. In the 1991 excavation, nearly intact full skeletons were found. But in the grave uncovered in 2007, only fragments were unearthed. Why were there so few bones? Less than 10% of a full skeleton was found. But even these scant remains can reveal more than DNA. The degraded condition of the most recently discovered bones might actually be a clue in itself. Anthony Falsetti is about to take another look at the information he's collected at his laboratory at the University of Florida. Drawing on his long experience of bringing stories of the dead back to life, he's looking for any patterns or links with other evidence. He'll comb through the accounts of the executioners and see if the history and bones tell a common story. He already knows that this will be a harrowing tale. The savagery did not end when the shooting stopped. Firing squad leader Yakov Yurovsky wrote that after the killing was done, he feared that loyalist troops might catch them red-handed. The plan was for a quick and clean disposal. But as the bodies were being loaded into a truck, the plan unraveled.
As they were lifting up one of the bodies, she sat up and screamed. It was either Maria or Anastasia. We know that two of the Grand Duchesses left that room alive. Ermakov grabbed a nearby rifle and ended up smashing them repeatedly in the face until they stopped screaming.
The bodies were then transported a dozen miles outside Yekaterinburg to the Koptyaki forest, to an area of abandoned mine works.
So here's what we know. The bodies were taken into the forest. They were thrown down a mine shaft. Grenades were thrown after them in an attempt to collapse the walls.
The bodies were only partially hidden. As dawn approached, Yurovsky returned to Yekaterinburg to report to his superiors. Misfortune struck again. Yurovsky's men got drunk and bragged to locals, telling them how they'd killed the royals and the location of the bodies. Their commander insisted on keeping the burial secret. The corpses had to be moved.
The next day, the bodies were retrieved, and Yurovsky has his men looking for a new location.
But after the bodies were exhumed, summer rain turned the ground to a gluey mud. The truck got stuck. The corpses had to be offloaded. Commander Yurovsky was exhausted, and his men became mutinous. He decided to try burning two of the bodies. To make the process easier, his men were ordered to dismember the corpses. Physical damage to fragment number 147 supports the dismemberment story. The royal remains were allegedly subject to another indignity, but the evidence wouldn't be visible. Yurovsky claimed that his men poured acid over the corpses to disfigure them beyond recognition. Chemical composition tests on the bones conducted in Russia revealed faint traces of sulfuric acid. According to Yurovsky, it was then that his men burned what was left of the two bodies. It's another element of the story that can be put to a forensic test. As an alternative to human flesh, pork is a good substitute. The composition and structure of the meat is similar to its human equivalent, and pigs are often used in forensic comparisons.
We know that they had between an hour and a half and 3 hours to completely consume 2 human bodies.
3 hours later, the pig carcass is charred, but still intact.
What we've demonstrated here is it's not possible to consume a body in a fire. Certainly not one for 3 hours, relatively low temperatures.
Yurovsky's plan to incinerate the corpses was more than a failure. It was a fiasco. Dawn was breaking, and there were still 9 bodies in the truck. A drastic change in tactics was in order. He claimed his men dug a second pit further to the west, that they threw the remaining 9 bodies into the pit, poured acid on them, and then covered them with planks and soil.
What we know about history is being reflected by the evidence.
But circumstantial evidence will not be enough to put the legend of Anastasia's escape to rest. To prove that the remains are not part of some elaborate hoax, historical accounts must be corroborated by the irrefutable. DNA. Do these new bodies belong to Russia's royal bloodline? By most accounts, Tsar Nicholas II and his royal family were a close, tight-knit group, frequently seen together. Filmed here on a cruise when the children were still very young. Then playing tennis while on holiday a few years later. And parading together in this 1913 celebration of 300 years of Romanov rule, starring the 9-year-old Crown Prince Alexei, and the 4 daughters about to bloom into womanhood. But were the Romanovs as inseparable in death as they were in life? DNA evidence gathered from the second and most recent grave attributed to them will tell the story. 5 months after first selecting the bone samples for analysis, DNA expert Mike Coble is now ready to share his findings.
Let's see what you've got.
The first thing that we should look at is here. This is the marker that determines sex. And sample 146, there's an XY, which means this is a male sample.
Right.
And then 147 has 1 X peak, and this is what we see with females.
So far, the DNA only demonstrates that there were 2 bodies in the grave, 1 male, 1 female. Mike Coble's next step was to compare the male sample with DNA from Tsar Nicholas and his wife Alexandra.
So what we have here on top, this is a profile from the Tsar, and then this on the bottom is a profile from the Tsarina, and here is the male sample from the second grave. We expect that this particular profile is going to be a combination of the Tsar and the Tsarina, if this is truly Alexei. This male got this 25 repeat peak from the Tsar, and this 23 peak was passed to him from the Tsarina. And here is the male sample.
That makes 17 out of 17 possible matches.
The evidence is overwhelming.
Yeah, absolutely. That's their son.
Exactly.
And they had 1 son, and that's Alexei.
Exactly.
Right.
Finally, there's compelling forensic evidence that 13-year-old Crown Prince Alexei was executed, along with the rest of his family, though not buried with them. But what about the female found in the second grave?
This is some of the SCR
Mike Coble
data
compared Alexei's DNA with hers.
What's interesting, though, is that, notice, they both share 23. They both share this marker, which is a 33.2 repeat.
Once again, one genetic marker after another is shared.
147 has 17 repeats, 23 repeats.
Leading to another overwhelming statistical probability.
It's over 1 million times more likely that these remains are siblings than if they were completely unrelated.
Okay.
Very strong evidence here that we have a brother and a sister. Yeah.
That sister was either Maria or Anastasia. But beyond that, the DNA evidence has nothing else to suggest.
Of course, there is a limitation here. The DNA can't tell us exactly which child is Anastasia and which child is Maria.
The bottom line is it really doesn't matter anymore because they're all present and accounted for.
Yeah.
After almost an entire century, the final chapter of the Romanov dynasty can be written at last. Anastasia, the youngest Romanov daughter, did not escape the firing squad. Like her mother, her father, her baby brother, and her 3 older sisters, Anastasia was shot to death in July 1918, 1 month after her 17th birthday. She was buried along with the others among the towering birch trees. It was surely not the end any of them expected. Or it is... But the DNA evidence makes it clear that's what really happened. On the night when Russia's longest-lived dynasty came to its abrupt and bloody end.